Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Brooke Murphy, Content Strategist and Editor with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenter. Alice Brewer has spent 10 years as an epidemiologist in both the pharmaceutical industry and healthcare. Most recently, she served as the Director of Infection Prevention for a large multi-hospital health system in Wisconsin, where, through utilization of robust analytics and innovative strategies, she led a 70% reduction of healthcare-associated infections across the health system. Alice earned her bachelor's degree in molecular biology from the University of North Carolina and a master's degree in epidemiology from Indiana University School of Medicine. In 2016, she achieved CIC certification in infection control and epidemiology. She also has a record of publications and presentations in the fields of infectious disease and epidemiological studies. I will actually turn over the floor now to John, who will kick off the presentation today. John?
Yes. All right. So I know, I have a story that I kind of like to share with everybody because it definitely relates to the potential benefits from Trudi's services. But a couple of years ago, over the summer, I was unfortunately diagnosed with a particular type of cancer, and it was discovered that I had a tumor, and in all likelihood, it was probably malignant. So I had surgery within a couple of days of learning that, which was kind of traumatic. And then I started recovery. So it took probably about 2 weeks for me to be back up and running, where I was back, at work. And so there was, a pretty significant recovery time there. But all in all, it was pretty swift. As part of my doctor's follow-up care, he recommended that I go once every 3 months for checkups to make sure that the tumor markers were in order and there weren't any increases on that front. Hopefully there wouldn't be a recurrence. My first checkup was totally fine. Everything was all good, but they decided to have me come back, of course, to continue every 3 months. The second time I went in, I had a panel of, I guess it was blood work, and then I had a chest x-ray, an MRI. But in advance of the appointment I was supposed to have with my doctor, his administrative assistant said that I also needed to have a physical done. So I took another day off of work to go and have this physical done, which was in a separate part of the hospital. Again, everything was fine. I had my appointment, but then I believe it was the next evening, I went over to a friend's house and then I started having issues with my stomach. So out of nowhere, I had a little bit of diarrhea and I was feeling very uncomfortable, but it seemed to subside a little bit, so I didn't think it was that big of a deal. At the end of the night, I went home and everything just kind of went downhill from there. So it came back, and then I also had severe nausea followed by vomiting, and that lasted all through the night and well into the next afternoon, to the point where I was incredibly weak and shaky, and my heart rate was so high I didn't really know what was going on. And my mom finally advised me. She just said, you have to go to the hospital. So I had my roommate take me to the ER. And despite there being quite a full lobby, they admitted me almost immediately because I was severely tachycardic. And so they brought me back. It took, I want to say, 4 or 5 different IV bags just for me to be able to produce a urine sample for them to analyze. And I was there under observation for a couple of days before they finally decided to, well, I mean, it's hard to really recall all of the events, but I want to say it was day 2 where they ordered a stool sample panel, and it turned out that I had C. diff. I had a positive test for C. diff. So the doctor who came in to kind of break the news to me asked, so, well, when was the last time you were in a hospital or a medical facility? Because that's more often than not where these types of infections are acquired. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I was here day before yesterday, just for a routine physical. And she kind of gave me a little telling smile and said, yeah, that's probably where you got it. Which to me was kind of a surprising answer. It was almost, even though it wasn't really an admission of guilt, that's kind of how it felt. Like, oh yeah, you probably got it from getting checked up by us. The recovery process for C. diff was significantly worse than the reason why I was initially there. I was there to have a surgery to remove a malignant tumor, and I ended up spending more time in the hospital with the C. diff than I did for an outpatient surgery. So I was there for a cumulative 4 days, in the 2 days in the medical, or 3 days in the medical observation unit, and then 1 full day in a regular hospital room. After I got back home, I was prescribed a course of vancomycin, and I believe I had one other antibiotic as well. And I was out of work, I believe, for a total of 3 weeks because I was also just incredibly weak and did not feel well from having taken the vancomycin. It really kind of sapped my energy and definitely was not feeling up to going to work. Now, once I finally recovered, I still didn't feel 100%. I still had I felt lethargic, a general just kind of sense of malaise, I guess. And even to this day, I still have some sorts of effects. And, maybe it's because the antibiotics also killed some of the good bacteria in my stomach. I couldn't say for sure, but it has been an ongoing thing despite no longer testing positive for C. diff. So that always, of course, when I heard about Trudi, I thought to myself, well, I mean, if all hospitals use this, I probably wouldn't have had that happen. And we're just talking about the health issues and then also the fact that I was out of work for a while. But I haven't even touched on the fact that this, in addition to that cost me even more money out of pocket. Despite having a really, really good PPO, I still had out-of-pocket costs associated with having to go back to the hospital for something I got at the hospital. So I guess to sum it up, I think, if everybody used Trudi, I don't know that we would be, or that I anyway would be in this position. And I really wish that would have been something that had been considered at this particular hospital. So yeah, that's pretty much my story, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Alice will now turn the floor over to you to kick off today's presentation. Thank you so much, John.
All right, thanks, Brooke. And thanks everybody for joining us today, and happy Infection Prevention Week. I know you guys are all busy with activities this week, so we appreciate you joining us for this conversation. And I'd especially like to thank John for sharing his story with us. I think as infection preventionists and working in the clinical setting, it's very easy for us to get wrapped up in the statistics and our infection rates, and it's easy to forget that all of those numbers represent people and patients that have been impacted by real people who have come to the hospital to be made well and have ended up sicker than they were when they arrived. So thank you, John, for sharing with us and helping to kind of frame this conversation around the patient experience as we start talking about how UV technology and Trudi in particular can help to mitigate that risk and help keep our patients safer. So there are a few number of statistics, and Brooke, if you could forward to the next slide. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with these. These are our statistics we look at all the time. The number of hospital-acquired infections that we see in this country annually, are staggering. 1 in 25 patients. It increases mortality and length of stay, morbidity, as we learned from John's story, and there's a financial side to it as well. It's unfortunately inescapable. It costs hospitals a lot of money. It costs patients a lot of money. It starts to affect our reimbursements and our public reporting. So it's certainly a significant issue, and one that I think we all try to address in whatever ways that we can. We'll touch on the finance side a bit more in a bit, but next slide, we'll start looking at some of the evidence. So we know from the published literature there's been quite a bit of research done on UV and its germicidal properties. Trudi in particular, there are about a dozen studies currently. They're all independent, third party. Trudi didn't have any stake in any of those studies, didn't participate in them in any way. So some of them are here. For a full list of these, you can go to the Trudi website to get a full list of these studies and links to them, and so you can read them on your own. But Trudi and UV have been shown to be effective against MDROs, MRSA, VRE, C. diff, and can be used as an adjunct to your manual terminal cleaning to help mitigate that risk of transmission to the next patient in the room. So on the next slide, we're just going to take a look at one of the studies. This is one of the first studies that was done on UV efficacy by Dr. Bill Rutala out of UNC. And he looked at UV inactivation of pathogens in a hospital room. So these are patient rooms. He did use a Trudi device. And the kind of critical thing about this one is that he looked at C. diff, which is what we're, kind of the focus of our conversation today. But he looked at it in both direct line of sight and indirect, so shadowed areas. And that's always been a big conversation when talking about UV and whether or not it's really truly effective in shadowed areas. So you can see from this table that, of course, log reduction in direct line of sight. So you're not worrying about shadows or reflection. You're seeing a much higher log reduction. But when you look at that indirect line of sight or the shadowed areas, you are still seeing a pretty significant log reduction, so 2.43 log 10 reduction. So you're reaching that shadowed area. You can ensure that you are disinfecting those areas, and you're not needing to move the device around the room to make sure you've hit all those nooks and crannies and corners of the room. There are a couple other papers out here that show the same kind of results. There's one by the group Mahida et al. That was there in the UK, and then also John Boyce, who was also in North Carolina. And again, if you want to take a look at these papers, and I encourage you to do so, it's always important to do your own research. All of these papers are found on Trudi's website. So research is important, and I think in our world we're seeing more and more of that driving our decision making and our practice. But as an infection preventionist and an epidemiologist, I also like to see real world data. What's really happening in hospitals and in patient rooms, and how do we know that this is really working in the real world? So a couple of real world kind of case studies for you to share today. The University of Wisconsin Health System in Madison has been using Trudi for about a year. Prior to implementing Trudi, they went through the whole gamut of CDI prevention tactics. They switched to a sporticidal disinfectant for all their rooms. They're monitoring 36 high-touch surfaces. They have a nurse-driven isolation protocol, testing protocol, robust antimicrobial stewardship program. They extended their isolation for C. diff patients to 30 days post positive test, and a host of things involving rounding and really just making sure that it's a good solid program. But they were still seeing infection rates of about 10 per 10,000 patient days, which, as we know, is going to earn you a phone call from the health department or the state regulators, because that's just too high. So what they did was they brought in Trudi. They brought in about 14 robots throughout the hospital. It's about a 500-bed hospital. And they had their utilization really high. They were utilizing the robots about 92% of all their C. diff discharges and transfers. And so over the course of about 9 months, and this is the most recent data that we have from them, they were able to drop their rates to 4.7 per 10,000 patient days. So about 50% reduction, which in the course of 9 months, that's huge. And I think, you know, in my previous role, monitoring C. diff and really trying to drive those rates down, you know, that's a huge win. So they've seen a great deal of success. We're continuing to work with them and touch base with them about what their rates would be. So that's one example. So the next example that we have is Chesapeake Regional Healthcare. Chesapeake Regional was a part of the Better D study, which we didn't touch on, but the Better D study was a CDC-funded clinical trial to test the efficacy of UV as a disinfectant adjunct to manual cleaning, and it utilized Trudi. The CDC and these researchers selected Trudi as their device of choice. So Chesapeake Regional Healthcare was one of the participants in this study, and so during the course of the study, they had Trudi machines that were provided to them through the study, and then after the study was over, they had to give those back, and they saw such great results with them and were so pleased with the utilization of them and the integration into the workflow and the reduction in their rates that they came back and purchased them. So I think that's always such a great vote of confidence when, you know, somebody gets something to use for a limited time as part of a study and, you know, they don't have a financial stake in it, and they come back and say, you know what, we liked it so much that we want to buy one. So you can see here they saw about a 12% decrease in their C. diff infections during the arms of the study that included Trudi and bleach. But they also saw reductions with their other MDROs. So, you know, I think is yet another example that if you use UV and you use it appropriately and get it integrated well into your hospital's workflow, you can really make a huge impact on your infection rate. So the next case study that we have is from Yavapai Regional Medical Center in Arizona. And this was a really cool example of a way to utilize UV. So they were seeing really high rates in one of their units, ongoing transmission of C. diff, and they said, you know what, we want to come in and we want to utilize Trudi, and we want to clean the unit. We want to focus on this one unit and get all the discharges and kind of start from a clean baseline. So for about a month, they came in, and every single discharge off that unit, they brought Trudi in after the terminal cleaning process. And so they started this in December, or they started in November, and then in December, when the study concluded, they kept collecting data. And then in April of this year, which is the last time we touched base with them to get data, they still had 0 reported hospital-acquired C. diff infections on that unit. So again, a little bit of a different approach, not just targeting C. diff discharges, but targeting all discharges on a unit. You know, you can impact your hospital rates, hospital-acquired infection rates, by just really kind of creating a clean base. And I think, you know, circling back to John's story, I think it's possible that, you know, had the hospital that he'd been in used a similar approach, you know, he might not be in the situation that he's in now. So what does it look like when we integrate evidence into practice? So, you know, we've looked at some of the research, we've looked at some of the case studies, but what does that really mean to us as practitioners? You know, when do we take that evidence and say we need to kind of translate this to our daily practice? And so what does that really look like? So evidence-based practice, including UV, really should be framed by a strategy that focuses on improving safety. So keeping the patient safe in the hospital and not sending them home sicker than they arrived is the priority. And really, this should be a bundled approach. There is no magic bullet. There's no one thing that by itself is going to solve all of our problems when it comes to hospital-acquired infections. You have to have a combination approach with, good solid cleaning, hand hygiene, antimicrobial stewardship, and then also the use of emerging technologies and adjunct cleaning processes. So standard cleaning tasks, we know from the CDC and AORN what those should look like. That's, I think, something that we are all very familiar with and doing on a regular basis. Same with hand hygiene. We get those standards from a number of agencies, and we know what that should look like and how that should be done. And then we get to kind of the adjunct technology. So UVC is considered an adjunct to terminal cleaning. AORN came out with that recommendation a couple of years back. And it's not a magic bullet, just like hand hygiene, very important and will help you a lot with your approach and your rates, but by itself, it's not going to. Hand hygiene doesn't clean the room, and good manual cleaning doesn't keep your clinicians' hands clean. So, you really have to look at these as part of a bundle, as part of a comprehensive program. So I mentioned the CDC-funded trial, the Better D study, which was published in The Lancet back in January of this year. And really what they looked at was, is UV effective? And is it an effective addition to terminal cleaning, to your standard terminal cleaning? And what they found was that when you add UV to your standard cleaning, they used quat ammonium as part of their cleaning process. They saw a 30% risk reduction of MDRO transfer to the next patient into the room. So I think that really, over the last 10 months, I think that's really sparked that conversation of, okay, this is a valid technology. It can really provide a benefit to our patients and improve our patient safety. So what really are the components of evidence-based practice? Next slide, Brooke, sorry. So Trudi takes this kind of comprehensive approach. We're not just gonna, bring you a robot and turn it on and say good luck and keep in touch. We really try to set up a good, effective program and protocols for hospitals to use that's really based specifically on your needs. So we look at a couple of different program models. We talked about with some of these case studies that there were some hospitals that choose to just tackle isolation discharges. So they're not going to worry about any terminal cleaning with UV, any rooms that didn't have an isolation patient in. They're looking to just get their C. diff patients, their MRSA patients, anybody with one of those MDROs that tend to stick around. So that's one model. We also have hospitals that really are just looking at using Trudi in their perioperative areas. So they are cleaning their ORs once a night or once a week. They're cleaning their SPD areas and their PACUs and kind of perioperative suites with UV after they've done a terminal clean. And then we have hospitals who are attacking both of those models and maybe using Trudi more during the day when discharges are happening in the patient rooms, and then in the evening, and then overnight, third shift, they're using the perioperative model and hitting all of their ORs with UV. So it's really dependent on what your hospital needs are, where are your problems, are you seeing more SSIs, are you seeing more MDROs, and how do you want to use UV? And it's going to be different with every hospital, so it's really a great conversation to have. The other thing that you want to think about is, where are you focusing Trudi? Are you, really just having one major issue is, a C. diff, your heartburn issue, and you're just seeing so much of it that you really just need to wrap your hands around that. And so you want to focus all of your attention on getting C. diff discharges. Or like at Yavapai, do you have one unit or one room type? So a high risk area like a burn unit or a transplant unit that is really your focus of concern, and do you want to prioritize UV for that specific unit? So again, different for every hospital, and definitely something that we want to have a conversation about so that we can figure out how best to help you achieve your disinfection goals. We all know that hospitals are visited by regulatory agencies, and they're looking for proof of training and education and certification. And so there's a robust education that gets provided on how Trudi is used and why we're using it, and why it's important. Tied into that is a communication strategy so that message comes from the top down. So leadership is involved. And then when Trudi leaves, you are regulatory ready. You have documentation that all of your staff have been trained and have had competency evaluations done, and those are all on paper and filed and ready to be handed over should a regulatory agency come for a visit. And then the last piece that really, I think, sets Trudi apart is, we're going to follow up with you to make sure that, your program is still working the way you need it to, that you're still seeing the results that you want to be seeing, that if you've got barriers, we can help you eliminate those so that, we don't have areas that get missed. And you don't have patients who have a story to tell like John, where, maybe you were using it and you kind of fell off the wagon a little bit and you missed some areas, or you slipped a little bit in your utilization. So, there's a constant touch point with Trudi's team to say, how can we help you? Is there anything that you want to see changed or improved? And, we'll come back in. We've got great teammates who will come on site and help with whatever you need. So I think that as far as your practice goes, Trudi really becomes a partner for you as you're implementing this evidence-based technology into your hospital. So the finance side of it, and how do you justify, utilizing UV technology? It is a significant investment. I'm not going to pretend that, this is not a major, line item in your budget. So having a return on investment tool is crucial to help you decide how much to invest. Do you need one robot? Do you need two? Do you need 10? And then also to help you convince your leadership and the hospital leadership that this is a solid investment, and that you're going to see some benefit from this, and it's not just a cost, that there will be some return to you. I didn't mention this when we were talking about it, but the University of Wisconsin actually they reported about a $1.3 million cost savings after 9 months of use. So it's certainly possible and easy to show that return to your leadership, that if we invest in this technology, we're not only going to improve our patients' outcomes and provide a safer environment for them, but it's going to improve our bottom line too as a system and as a facility. So some of the things to look at, how many HIIs are you guys seeing in a year? We can talk about the cost. That $15,000 per HAI is kind of one of those kind of standard ones that a lot of hospitals know specifically what they're spending on their HAI. So we can talk about that. Same with SSIs, that $25,000, that's an average cost that's out there in the literature, but certainly if you know what you're spending on them, then that number is what we can use to figure out how you should be investing in this technology. You want to think about how many isolation cases you have annually. Is the scope of what your issue is, does that warrant, a huge investment in UV, or is it, something that needs to be scaled up or scaled down. If you're wanting to do your OR suites, you know, how many perioperative suites do you have? How big of an area are you talking about when you're talking about, you know, the perioperative area of your hospital? And then labor, you know, we have a great director of program management who is a whiz at figuring out how much labor and productivity and how you manage that without really necessarily needing to add FTE. You know, I think we've done it at most hospitals without them really needing to add any extra personnel to run the machine. So that's all part of the conversation is what is your current cost, and then, you know, what is the cost of adding UV, and how much is it potentially going to be able to save you? So, you know, in addition to talking about what kind of a program you want to run, we're going to talk to you about how much of a financial investment is your program going to need, and, you know, and how much are you potentially looking at saving after implementing UV. So, you know, we looked at the research that's out there, and there are a number of really smart people that have done research on UV, have done studies with Trudi. And so what are the experts in the field saying? You know, I'm with Trudi, you saw the disclosure page, but I've walked in your shoes as an infection preventionist, and you know, and UV is certainly something that was evaluated for my hospitals. And so I am not the national expert, but the national experts are saying that UV really is an investment that hospitals should be looking at. Bill Rutala, over the last couple of years, has had this to say about it. There is increasing evidence to support the contribution of the environment to disease transmission. You know, I think we know that. We've seen that research pretty widely published. And that research showing that, you know, the environment contributes to making patients sicker really supports then having good, solid disinfecting regimens to reduce the risk of acquiring that pathogen from the healthcare environment. We also know from the research, and I think this has been published pretty widely as well, that interventions and, you know, standard manual cleaning only effective about 50% of the time. You know, we can go back in after a room has been cleaned and swab it, and it's not as clean as we think it might be. And so about 50% of surfaces get missed during that manual clean. And so, you know, the quote from Bill Rutala, which I think is really great. He's, you know, a pioneer and a leader in infection prevention. He's really saying, you know, we as infection preventionists and patient advocates need to say to our CFOs that we need these technologies, and we need to be looking at the data. The data really is showing a reduction in infections, and the investment is worthwhile. So I think what we've talked about today, and, you know, starting with John's experience as a patient who acquired C. diff, you know, during just a routine visit, was probably completely unnecessary. And so how can we, you know, framing our conversation around that, how can we as infection preventionists and as EVS associates, how can we really make sure that we're doing everything that we can to prevent that from happening and prevent our patients going home sicker than they came to us? So that's what I have for you today. And I think we'll open it up for questions. And Brooke, I will let you take over.
Great. Thanks, Alice, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's Q&A session. Please remember, if you have any questions, you can submit them by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for today. So first one here from an audience member, interesting two-parter. First, what would you say is unique about the Trudi device versus other UV devices on the market? And the second part to that, it appears that the Trudi device has been used as the test device in several studies. Why is that?
Okay, so the Trudi device, one, it was the first to market, so it's been on the market about 10 years, and it has a patented sensor technology. So if you ever get a chance to see the device, there was a picture of it on that second slide. Around the top of it are sensors, and so those sensors measure the reflected UV. So the robot, once it's on, it's sending UV out into the room. That UV is bouncing and reflecting and making its way back to the Trudi robot. And so what those sensors are doing is they're testing and they're measuring to make sure that the minimum dose required has been received. So once every sensor around the top, and they ring 360, once every sensor has received at least that minimum dose set, then it turns off. So Trudi is different in that it's the only one that really measures the dose being distributed to the room. And so, you know, we talk in manual cleaning, you talk about dwell time. Well, dose is very similar. UV, we're talking about dose instead of dwell time. So you need to achieve the right dose, and you need to know how much in order to say that the room has really been disinfected. And so that also answers the second question as to why Trudi has been used as a test in some of these studies. So, you know, the CDC did a lot of research, and the researchers at Duke and UNC did a lot of research into the devices on the market. And they chose Trudi because of that ability to measure the dose of UV being administered, and also because of its ease of use. It's a pretty user-friendly device to use. It only needs to be positioned one time in the room, so you don't have to tie up your environmental services staff waiting to go back in and move it, and then go back in and move it again. They can put it in one time, and then they can go and do other tasks and go clean the next room over, and then come back when the robot is done. So it's been, you know, it was evaluated on both its efficacy and ease of use, and that's why it was chosen to be used in those studies.
Great, Alice. That's a great point. Thank you. We have another question from an audience member here who wants to know, will the UV be effective in the event of visibly soiled surfaces, or must all surface bioburden be removed for efficacy?
That's a great question. And, you know, I would tell you that, you know, UV is not going to replace your manual cleaning. You do still need to clean surfaces. UV is not going to be as effective at, you know, disrupting the DNA of bacteria if there's still, you know, grime and bioburden layered over the top. So the surfaces need to be clean, but even if you've removed all the visible bioburden, and I think we know that sometimes this happens, that EVS cleaners will go in and they clean and they might clean pretty well and kind of do a visual look and say, okay, well, we don't see any more, you know, spots or material on the room, so you know, we're probably good. But you still missed spots. So, you know, no, Trudi isn't going to be as effective if there's still bioburden present. It will still be effective, but it's going to be most effective if that manual clean has already been done. And then what it does is it goes back and it eliminates anything that might have still been left behind, which we know happens.
Great, thanks for clarifying that, Alice. Another question here from an audience member who wants to know, how do you deal with rooms that are glass front rooms, such as ICUs? Absolutely, and that's a great question too, because I think as newer hospitals are being built, we have a lot of rooms, particularly in EDs and ICUs, that you have that glass door. The great thing about UVC is that it does not penetrate glass. So it can be used in a room with a glass door. As long as that door is closed, you can see that the robot is on, and you'll see that blue light, but that light isn't penetrating the glass. So you're perfectly safe to stand and watch it if you know you want to do that. But it is
perfectly safe to use behind a glass door.
Good to know. Great, thanks, Alice. Another audience member wants to know how much time is added to room turnaround with this technology?
So the Better D study, they did look at that because that's an important consideration. You know, we've got hospitals that are busy and you want to make sure that you're not impacting your throughput, your ability to room patients. So the Better D study, they saw on average about a 4-minute increase in turnaround time to rooms. So not a significant amount. And we've certainly seen hospitals where they've been able to do it without increasing their turnaround time at all. And in part, that's because you can clean a room, bring the Trudi in, turn it on, go clean the next room. And while your Trudi is running, you're doing other things. So it doesn't take time away from, you know, your environmental services staff. They can continue cleaning rooms and have the next room available without having to wait and, you know, take 40 minutes to clean the room because they're having to keep going in and moving it. So that's another one of those things that Trudi provides as a service to you. We will come in and we will train your staff and we will work with your throughput and your, you know, your bed tracking and really figure out what the best utilization of Trudi is so that you're able to manage your workflow and not impact your throughput at all.
Thank you for pointing that out, Alice. Another audience member is asking if Trudi would do a sample ROI.
Absolutely. So on our website, trudi.com, you can submit a request. And you can also find information about our leadership and you know, people that you'll be working with. I believe our email addresses are there. But you can certainly send a request through the website and somebody will get in touch with you to reach out to you and set up a call with you to find out what your HAI rates are like, what your costs that you're looking at are, and work with you to kind of develop an ROI for you.
Great, that's super helpful. Another audience member here, we have a bunch of questions rolling in. How can Trudi help hospitals mimic the results of the CDC-funded Better D study?
Yeah, and so what we'll do is, and that's part of that evidence-based practice and the program model. So what we'll do is we'll sit down with you and figure out kind of what your hospital characteristics are like, you know, what your hospital-acquired infections are looking like, and we can certainly help you design a study similar to what the Better D study was, so that you can really have that proof and that evidence that Trudi works for you and, you know, is going to improve your patient safety results. So I think that's a great idea, and we would be happy to do that. I'm an epidemiologist, and I love designing studies, and I think it would be really fun and interesting to recreate and replicate that Better D study in some other hospitals.
Great, thanks, Alice. Another question here about efficacy. How does Trudi's technology ensure total room disinfection?
So we've got quite a bit of research, about 12 or 13 studies that have all used Trudi, all independent third-party studies, using a variety of study methodology. So we've got studies that have inoculated plates and discs and then utilized Trudi to demonstrate efficacy. We have studies that have used actual live patient hospital rooms and have swabbed areas of the room before and after utilizing Trudi. There's one study that was done at the VA in St. Cloud that was really dramatic. They plated their swabs on agar plates before and after Trudi, and so you can see, you know, the agar plate before Trudi was used is growing all kinds of colonies, and then the plate after swabbed after Trudi was utilized has nothing growing on it. So that is certainly great validation and evidence. And, you know, if you're interested in doing a trial and kind of doing the same thing at your hospital, we're certainly open to helping you with that or providing assistance if you're wanting to, provide the same level of evidence for your facility.
Great, thanks for clarifying. A very interesting question here. So when the technology is on, monitoring by EVS is not required?
That is correct. So a great feature of Trudi is that once it's placed in the room, it's fully controlled by an iPad. So, the EVS worker can place it in the room, they exit, close the door, put up all of our safety barriers. So we have signage and chains to put it in front of the door to make sure that nobody goes in there. And then they can turn Trudi on from the iPad. They can set it to send a message to their cell phone that Trudi is completed. So Trudi will send a text message to a cell phone that they're done, that the environmental services worker can come back and pick it up. So they can, it's absolutely put it in the room, turn it on, and then leave. And it'll let you know when it's done.
Interesting, great. Thank you so much, Alice. And it looks like we have time for about one more question here. That question will be, when comparing UV disinfection technologies, what things should hospitals consider?
So I think it's important to consider what your rates are. Are you seeing a significant problem, where, you've tried a lot of other interventions and you're not at that level that you want to be at and you really want to push to the next level. And for, hospitals, that's different for all hospitals. So I think that's something for everybody to kind of think about, and we can help you with that conversation if you'd like. So think about, kind of what your problem area is and, what the magnitude of it is and how you want to, how you've already addressed it and how you'd like to go forward. Also consider your environmental services team. They should absolutely be a part of the conversation. This really needs to be a partnership between infection prevention, environmental services, nursing, operating, OR staff. So make sure that you kind of have a multidisciplinary approach when you're thinking about this and starting this conversation. And then also think about, how your budget is structured. Is this something that you need to start talking about with your CFO and your budget people, now for next year, or do you have foundation money that you could use for this? So really think about, how you're going to make that financial presentation as well.
Those are all great points. Thanks, Alice. That looks like it is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank Alice Brewer, as well as Trudi Smart UVC for Alice's excellent presentation, and as well to our audience for participating today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.